All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Very excited to talk about what we're calling the new world order of communications. So, no surprise to anyone, AI is completely reshaping all things media and the way that information is consumed, which is certainly forcing brands to kind of rethink not only how they show up in LLMs, but how they produce content, and what that ultimately means for audience attention spans. Because I think, let's face it, at this point, you may have a great news campaign, but the one and done news campaigns are no longer going to maintain that same brand visibility and credibility that it once did. We need those always on communications engines that keep your brand top of mind. So this is a lot of change happening very quickly and a lot for everyone to navigate, which is why I'm so happy to be joined by an absolute all-star panel of communications professionals. So with me today is Toni Iafrate, the VP and Head of Global Comms at AlphaSense, an AI platform for market intelligence. Kristina O'Connell, CMO at Thrive, an IT outsourcing provider that works with small and mid-sized companies. And Christian Potts, the Senior Director of Public Relations at UiPath, a leader in agentic business orchestration. So thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you.
We're excited. So let's dive right in. I know we have a ton to cover. So I want to start by talking about essentially what I just said. So AI is becoming this new go-to information source for all audiences. And as people increasingly get their information from LLMs, brands need to make sure they're not just communicating with journalists, reporters, producers, and even influencers, but ultimately the AI engines that are increasingly influencing audience decision making. So can you start by telling me a little bit about how you're thinking about AI as this new audience?
Sure, I'm happy to kick it off, Kristen.
Great.
So I think when we think of AI systems today, I think we think of them truly as secondary but incredibly influential audiences.
Yep.
They aren't necessarily the decision makers themselves, but they're heavily shaping what decision makers actually see. And I think that does shift the goalpost a bit, right? It's no longer just about writing a press release that a member of the press may actually read, but it's also about how that story is getting parsed and summarized and surfaced by AI. And I think just in practice, that's really raising the bar, right? For clarity, for authenticity, for authority, and really for consistency. Because if your narrative isn't crisp, if it isn't well structured, if it's not repeatable, there's a good chance those AI systems will either misinterpret it or will ignore it entirely. And so, I think our role today as communicators has never been more important, right? And it's truly expanding because of this, because we've gone from not only influencing people directly, but we're shaping the AI systems that are increasingly influencing them.
Yes.
And so it's certainly just a whole lot of newness.
Yeah, there's so much in what you just said that I feel like we can kind of go off of. But one, I love that you're saying like it's not that we're not paying attention to the audiences that we always paid attention to, because we are. And I think it's a good point to think of AI as a secondary audience. Yes, we need to pay attention to it, but we still need to pay attention to the traditional media and end audiences that we always paid attention to. So I think that's such a good point. And the other point that you made, just around, how we need to revise the communications that we put out to be kind of crawlable and discoverable by AI engines. Can you talk a little bit more about, and this goes to any of you, like what changes that you're making specifically to your owned or even earned communications to be that much more discoverable by the LLMs?
Yeah, I can jump in, Kristen. I think we're expanding some things that I do agree with, just the consistency and clarity more than ever, right? Like brand, a big brand advocate, and just really our messaging and narrative being just so consistent across the board, right?
Yeah.
So we're now augmenting some of those traditional communications. A couple of things that, and also humans still own strategy and relationships, right? So not to forget that. So as we augment things, there are a couple new things we're doing to try to, create content FAQs on our website, even the way we write press releases with V2, right? So V2,
Yep.
having been I think my third time through with V2, always on the cutting edge of how we do that. But we're doing a couple things with native content syndication, for example, which is producing some really great views to our website, unique users coming in. And we're also doing some hyper-local work around Stacker, which is kind of interesting. So we're trying to augment some things. Because we do IT technology outsourcing, acquisitions are a big part of our play. So super hyper-local as we go into new regions and geographies, it's been helping as well. So again, it's it is a new world, new challenges, new ways that we can get our voice and brand out there, but really in an authentic, very consistent way. I go back to those basic principles all the time.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's great. And you're touching on something that I also wanted to talk about is kind of the message consistency, because I think that's important for a few reasons. It's important in terms of feeding the AI with consistent, repeatable signals. I think it's also important in terms of kind of the fleeting attention spans of our audiences. I think for better or for worse, there is this proliferation of content and there's so much information overload all the time. And so it's you may have a great story in Fortune or Fast Company, and that's awesome, but the next day people forget and they move on. And so I think, and again, it's not because of anything content wise, it's more just, again, like there's just too much information out there. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you're thinking about kind of that always on communications engine. And Kristina, you just touched on it in terms of how you're leaning on native ads and Stacker. But Toni and Kristen, like, how are you thinking about that? Is there more that, should be done by way of integrated communications and consistency of message to make sure that you're kind of consistently in front of the audiences that you want to ultimately influence?
I really appreciate that last point about sort of like the integrated communications piece, excuse me, because this is something that certainly has been a change in the way that we think about how we want to do, how we essentially want to tell stories here. A couple of things sort of like influence that. So number one is because so much of the buying decision is happening at a place where you can't directly influence it, you really do have to be thinking about that integrated that integrated sort of channel approach. Because if you're not going to get found the way that you want to get found because people are going to so many different places. Number one, and all AI is really doing is really a couple of things. Number one, it's providing you another point where you're being found. But number two, it's also, I think, for a lot of people, it's if it hasn't already, it is soon to replace the search bar. So if you're not thinking about how you are integrating content and creating consistency in your content for that new search bar, that new, whether it's Claude or Gemini or GPT or whichever model of your choice, you're going to experience, I think, a lot of what we experienced when search changed, say 5 years ago, where it's going to become a situation where you're going to start to be found in different ways at different places that aren't necessarily consistent with what your messaging is. If you ever truly want to like put yourself through like a really existential sort of exercise, go out and ask ChatGPT or Claude to write you like a mission statement for your company. And that will tell you just really how good you are doing, not only as a communications team, but just as an organization overall, in maintaining that consistency we're talking about. On a regular basis, I will get operating and business partners in our company who, not with any malicious intent, but will come to me and say, "Hey, I've got this press release, or I have this piece of content, or I have this thing that I've developed that I think is a really great point of view." And in the opening statement, you will see 2 or 3 revs ago what your brand messaging was. And that is simply just because the models are they're following the trail of whatever is out there as opposed to wherever you are today. So if you're not thinking about how you're like affecting consistency across every channel, using integrated communications, but also making sure that like when you do have updated messaging, when you do have those things that you are communicating that out to every single point at which content is being created or content is being aggregated, you have to be thinking about it this way, very much the way that you should have been thinking about search, back in like the late teens, late aughts.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I think, I'd love to hear, Christian, both from you and Toni, because UiPath and AlphaSense are both large organizations with lots of stakeholders owning different pieces of the marketing and communications puzzle. Like, are there things that you're doing to ensure that there is that consistency of message across channels so that your social teams are speaking to your PR teams, are speaking to your, web teams and all of that? Like, how do you best orchestrate that internally to ensure that, again, that everyone's kind of up to speed on the latest message, first of all, but then distributing that across the channels that they own?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think integrated campaigns really help us, right, to take that single idea and extend it and extend the lifespan of it, right? So these days, a report or a survey that you may work on, it doesn't just launch once. It becomes media coverage. It becomes the social content. It becomes the commentary that your ELT may be posting on LinkedIn, right? It's integrated into the customer conversations that are happening and the way your customer success organization talks about the organization. So I think for us, the goal is to really create multiple entry points into the same narrative over time, right? Because that narrative compounds rather than, fades. And I think, as we've already talked about, that is really the key here. It's that consistency. It's that same narrative. It's being extremely sharp. I think, the days of being clever or having clever language have kind of sailed a bit. And it's back to being extremely direct with your overall narrative.
Yeah.
Toni, I so agree with the whole clever idea. I mean, it's really about being that trusted source, right? Like, you really have to be authentic. And a lot of that's through the customer voice and use case experience, but definitely driven that very consistent. We have a brand guide that we do. I'm sure you all do. But we keep that updated and current. And that is really kind of the book which we all follow. And that's just super helpful, especially with a large company. Try to turn the ship is hard. So, but I agree with you totally. It's got to be very, very clear.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of structural things I think that you can do. So the channels matter, the content matters, the sort of like the input and the input channels and the output channels obviously a big part of that. But like structurally speaking, like there's also things that you can do, I think, to sort of like coach the organization, or at least coach your channel partners into a more consistent tone. So obviously number one is like put people in the right places. So like don't treat comms as being separate from social, as being separate from influencers, as being separate from advocacy. Put everyone under one umbrella. Force the teams to be together. That's something that we've recently are really focused on, and it's already paying huge dividends because, just simply put, we now have one place. We have one meeting a week, if not multiple meetings a week, where we literally go around the horn and someone can say, "I haven't heard about that. Tell me more," and then you create that cohesion that you're talking about. I think that the second piece of it too is AI is definitely, AI and the models are definitely places where like people are going to find you, but they can also be tools that you can use to make it to create more consistent ways for you to be found. And the style guide in particular, Kristina, it's a really well taken point that you made, because that is something like you can teach a model or teach models off of your brand guide. You can teach a model off of your style guide. Like, don't be afraid to look at things like, to look at a tool like Writer, or look at a tool like Enterprise Claude or Enterprise GPT. And don't be afraid to like put those things in there, provided you have the right guardrails around security and around NDAs and things like that. But like, don't be afraid to put those things in there and teach the model how you speak and how you think and what messages are important to you, so that when you are turning to those places as content generators, they've already been read in the same way that like the three of us are read in every day on how we're thinking about like using the right words or the right messaging or speaking to the right audiences.
Yeah.
Christian, it's exactly what my CTO has done. So all of that is built in. It's made such a difference with all the agents that we're building and all the use cases internally. And again, it's really around it's around adoption. So we're really pushing people to just use AI, right? But if they are, it is trained and built upon all of our brand guides. So that is just a great exercise in general. So glad that you mentioned that.
I want to talk a little bit more about content generation and go back to kind of what you said about, it's not necessarily about kind of being kind of creative anymore. It's about being authentic. So I want to understand how do you get to that authentic message, and how do you evolve it in a way that keeps pace with the market and what stakeholders care about, but that stays true to the value that you as a company actually provide? And the reason I'm saying this is because I think, we went through this period about, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago now, where every company all of a sudden was an AI company. They could have been done literally anything, and they just slapped AI powered in front of it and called themselves an AI company.
Like a shoe
Now we're
company that
seeing,
becomes an AI company?
what's that?
Like Allbirds, the shoe company
Yes, like
becoming an AI
Allbirds
company?
becomes an AI.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
mean, we could have a whole separate webinar on that. I also found that fascinating, but yes, exactly. And But I think now we're seeing this kind of other movement where all these historically software companies very much want to distance themselves from software connotation because of fears about SaaS apocalypse and what does that mean for the investor community and ultimately their business performance. So when it comes to telling your company story and leaning in with messages again that are authentic to your brand and also thought leadership narratives that align with your brand, how do you source that kind of initial content? Like before you kind of feed the AI engines and teach everyone, what is our style guide and what are the things that we talk about? Like how do you do that? And how often should you be doing that? And to what extent do you need to pivot while kind of staying true to what you've always done?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in. I think we anchor everything in only what we can say, right?
Yes.
Whether it's our proprietary data, whether it's our customer insights, it's our specific domain expertise, right? I think AI can generate content, but what it can't do is replicate differentiated perspectives, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so I think, we also keep a very strong human editorial layer, human in the loop, where, AI can assist, but it can't define our voice. And so I
Totally.
think that's also where leveraging industry analysts, leveraging executive voices also matters just overall. But again, it's like AI can do certain things, but it can't do it all. And I
Yeah.
think that's where having your differentiated message and your narrative really anchored at only what you can say really matters.
I think those are all fantastic points. I guess as a follow-on to that, like how often do you find that you're communicating with your executive team on those company messages? Like, do you feel that it's, just in general, more frequently than it was, say, a year or two ago or 5 years ago, just because the market's moving that much faster?
Yes, resoundingly yes. I think you almost have to sort of say like, hey, we can't jump on every wagon,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And again, it's like that's where I think being able to say like consistency of message matters, how we're defined on these LLMs matters. If we have all of these different messages out or jumping on the new shiny penny, that's actually hurting us more than it's helping us. But yes, a lot on the sort of messaging front. Yes, a lot,
Yeah.
Yeah.
a lot.
I think it is a real exercise in balance because like I really appreciate the point you made, Tony, about like, the customer voice is maybe the most principal voice that you have to sort of start with when you consider this. Um, a lot of times when you rely on internal sources, a lot of times what you run into is you run into leaders, whether those are operational leaders or business leaders or product leaders, who, because of the role that they're in, they live in the future. They are living at a time when whatever they're talking about has been delivered, and you've created that key message, that differentiation, that competitive advantage that is being envisioned when they talk about that.
Yep.
Unfortunately, the rest of us live in the present. Some of us even probably are still living in the past because we're trying to make that transition into whatever the new category is or whatever the new story is. So that's where the customer voice really has to play a really like strong and authentic role for you because they are the ones who every day are interacting with your stuff. Maybe they're using it in a prior, maybe they're using it to solve something that you used to solve in a prior life, and now you've got a new story, but whatever. But like that's still relevant to the story that you need to tell. And more importantly, that's still relevant to the way in which you're being found when people are using AI to understand who you are and what you do and why you provide value. Like that has to be front and center. And you have to make sure that those gathering points, your customer advisory boards, your in-person events, all of those things are set up in a way that you're capturing that continually so that it can be the sort of like ballast that you need to make sure your messaging remains strong and relevant and vibrant and like truly differentiated.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Well, and I think too, that brings up kind of something that we hear a lot from the media, from where we sit in terms of, a lot of companies right now, it sounds like they say the same thing. They make the same claims. What sets brands apart is when they can share that kind of third party validation about the value that they deliver. So, whether that comes through customer stories like you're talking about, Christian, whether that comes through analyst validation, whether that comes through influencer cultivation, I do think that is like so important in kind of setting brands head and apart in today's environment. And I know actually UiPath has done a lot of work with influencers. So I would love to talk a little bit about that because again, like it can be hard for a lot of brands to get those customer stories. We all want them, but it is hard to get. But can you talk a little bit about how influencers and analysts can kind of serve as that third party validation when you don't have customer stories to kind of bring your message to life?
Yeah, I mean, I'll lead off, but I would love to hear Kristina and Toni's perspective on this as well, because I think that influencers, the only thing I think we all have in common about influencers is that we all know they exist, but we all use them differently.
Yeah.
So I would be really keen to understand sort of like how the role they play in their programs versus our program. I mean, I can say so in talking with our advocacy team, talking with our social team, and looking at our influencer strategy, we are very much sort of focused on really having the right balance between promoters and creators, and more importantly, having like picking the right moments for when we sort of like tip the scale in either one of those directions. So for example, if we have, let's say, like something that we feel is like already sort of like validated, it could be like an update to our platform, it could be some strategic announcement about an acquisition or something like that, and we just want volume. We want volume and amplification. We would probably pursue more of our promoter strategy there. However, if we know we have something that feels a little bit more sort of like nascent, that's much more sort of like at the edge of the market, it may not even be productized. We are looking at creators as our chief partners there because they can help us because they bring in their perspective, number one, but number two, they can help us to maybe fill in some of the gaps, spackle over some of those cracks that we know might be in the strategy because it is directional as opposed to like a GA kind of thing. And having the right balance of those two things for every campaign that you run allows you to have that flexibility to create content that fits both sides, but also to understand, okay, if we go deeper on a creator strategy here, we're likely going to have more of an effect on the back end of how we're being found, as opposed to a promoter thing, which is like, we know how we're going to get found because we're controlling the narrative more closely. So like having that right balance there, I think is so critical. Like that's how, like when I talk to our influencer team, when I talk to our advocacy team, the approach that I come from is really from there is like let's just like figure out exactly what we're starting from, and then let's make our choices based off of that, as opposed to saying like, oh, this is a creative strategy, being like, well, why? Like have the why answered first, and then get to the what and the how and the delivery.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it makes a lot of sense too. And it kind of gives you the opportunity, both in terms of, whether you have them serve as a creator or a promoter, to just, again, amplify your visibility across channels that you might otherwise not have exposure to. So, yes.
Yeah. And listen, right? I mean, I think that executive voices today are likely more important than they've ever been, right? For I think a lot of what Christian just shared, but also because of the fact that they provide original, insight, right? And again, like that's not something that AI can just manufacture. So I think taking the approach of really investing in making your leaders more visible through thought leadership, through media engagements, through owned content, that really reflects a clear and consistent point of view. And I think, looking at some latest stats, looking at some of these LLMs, I think most of the cited sort of content that they're, pulling up as part of their generation is content over the past 10 or 11 months. And so I think because of that, that's again, it's where that like consistency and not jumping on the shiny penny just because it's the new shiny thing.
Yeah, I think that is so important. And I feel like we've seen a real rise in the past, I don't know, I would say year of executives taking to channels like LinkedIn, for instance, and sharing their thoughts on topical industry issues or even more mainstream business issues. I know, Toni, you do a lot of work with your executive team to support that effort. I'd love to hear a little bit more from all of you in terms of, what you might be doing to kind of support executive thought leadership, because 100%, like I think that there's more that's expected of leaders today when it comes to kind of steering the conversation.
Sure. Do you want me to jump in, or Toni, you have anything?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Go for it.
From an executive level, thought leadership is always super important. From coming from more of a product or a solution kind of environment like I do, really trying to make things easy for people, right? Meet people where they're at, make it easy. So we actually just installed Gaggle AMP, for example, for amplification. And that actually really helps drive, even on the channel side, right, is controlling that content so it's easier for them to distribute and share content, share posts. That was always such a wall for us, right? Like what do they post? Anything we did was outdated if we even wrote some social posts. So that has made a big impact internally for our employees and externally. But from a executive thought leadership point, it's always something that we're trying to get out to, all of our partners, right? New folks that it's a very much education based, but also thought leadership. There's a lot of education around technology, and that's really why we try to keep things very, at that level. We want to help people understand why these technologies are important, and we'll use our platform partners to get those messages out as well. But that's been a really big help for us, is just having it be more controlled.
Well, I think too, you're speaking to something that I think is becoming so important, but is potentially overlooked. And it's really the fact that at the end of the day, even though we are without a doubt living in the AI era, I think at the end of the day, people do want to hear from other people, whether that is executive leaders, whether that is peer community. But I think we're seeing almost like a resurgence of this kind of like craving and desire for more like person to person connection, even if it's happening through machines. But I'd love to understand, like, A, do you agree with that? But B, if you do, like, what are things that you're experimenting with or investing more in to support more of that kind of personal connection that is so critical, I think, to any sort of communications effort or real like business success?
Yeah, I think in-person events and customer-specific events like, customer councils and so forth are really becoming more important and not less. I think even to the extent of, the days of very large, technology conferences, like even in some ways that is changing to more customized, personalized experiences for a specific segment of your customer base. So I think for sure, those in-person experiences, they just offer something that you can't get anywhere else. And that's that connection. It's that community. It's that trust. And I think as we were even talking about yesterday, I think, no one sort of knows what they're doing AI wise. Right. Like, gone are the days where you were in a room of CIOs and they were holding things close to the vest, like they didn't want to share what they were doing for competitive reasons. These days, they're all like lamenting over the fact that they don't know what the hell is going on. So I think that's where that connection really, truly matters.
Toni literally just ran a cab event yesterday. We sat in a room with very high profile clients, and it's so true. We have, AI consulting and managed services as part of our solution set. So people are spiraling. No one knows how to move forward in a safe, with guardrails, understanding governance, understanding just, we're taking this walk this crawl, walk, run approach to just really adoption.
Yeah.
Just use AI. Let's not even talk use cases yet. Let's talk about governance and AI policy. Make sure you have the right security in place. But people are spiraling. One thing that was interesting that people said was that they haven't worked this hard ever. They're working harder than ever.
Yes.
And you would think AI would do the opposite, but it's putting you into this like kind of circle. That's why we try to come in with a very, confident, like one step at a time. Let's just make sure you're
Yes.
using this securely. And I think that's like it's something that everyone is struggling with. So it can definitely help you, but it's also causing a lot of pain because no one knows who owns it. No one knows how they're going to move forward with it in a simple way, how they're going to prove ROI. I mean, there's so many things that I think people are looking for, just some of that grounded foundational start points, right? So I think events are just coming back in a big way. I'm super happy about that too. Those touch points with people and building trust with folks is really essential in today's market.
Yeah, I really agree with both Toni and Kristina on this, that it's been really incredible to see like the sort of almost like the rejuvenation of the in-person event. I think let's just be honest, like the last 5 years or so of just working in technology, working in a customer facing sort of like role, even like being involved in customer facing stuff, like there's been a lot that's happening at the pandemic. We've had various sort of market forces that have gone up and down. We've got the, fill in the blank apocalypse of your choice that's been happening on a regular basis. If anything, to Kristina's point, there's like a human need for people to get together and be able to have a forum to talk about these things. What I think is really exciting is that there's a way that you can start to replicate some of that, like sort of like what used to be a webinar driven experience or used to be like an online driven experience. You can replicate a lot of the takeaways or a lot of like the delivery of that in an in-person setting in sort of like very like constructive ways, I guess I would put it for lack of a better term. Like, we have a flagship customer event. We have a series of like smaller flagship customer events that happen in different regions all around the world. We have like persona focused events. We have like, that happen in different markets and stuff like that, either assigned to a product or assigned to a persona, and oftentimes assigned to both. But then we're also experimenting with like, let's just go to a city where we know we have a significant customer share, we have a significant mind share, and let's just like get people in a room for like 6 hours. Let's give them breakfast. Let's have a couple of speakers go up, and then let's just have workshops. And literally just like say to someone like, not necessarily turn your phone off, but like let the part of your brain that wants to explore and the part of your brain that wants to ask questions and the part of your brain that wants to like experiment, like let's just get in a room. Let's just have a bunch of people do that. And I sat in on one of those, like my first week at UiPath, I sat in on one of these, and I was just amazed at like the, for lack of a better term, like the vulnerability of the people in the room to want to have conversations like that. And, of course, the conversation was about the advent of AI through business processes and what it's looking like and stuff like that. I mean, that's our business. That's who we are. But like it served to me as almost like a microcosm of what the larger conversation that you were describing, Kristina, is, which is like people don't know what to do. Like they've done their experimentation. They've done their pilots. They know that like I could probably do this on like, if I can do invoicing for my legit, for this team, I can do invoicing for this team using AI. Now it's like a scale problem. And scale is like the hardest thing for people to talk about in a sort of like non like peer setting because everyone's business is different. Scale for an SMB is way different than scale for a Fortune 100 company. It's the same principles, but it's a different process. So if you start to gather cohorts together in these events, like we're talking about, suddenly it's like, here's a safe space for you to say, I have 10,000 employees around the world. I have no idea how to get AI into their hands. So now you can like create that shared experience. And then to bring it sort of back to like the original sort of focus of this is like, you can take that shared experience and you can now start to like integrate that into your messaging. So you have more of a story that is customer voice focused. That's where I think the real magic comes in.
Totally
agree.
Yeah, totally. No, I totally agree. I think it's like that single event can generate weeks or months of downstream content, right? And again, going back to that level of like trusted content, like not the fluffy stuff, like this is that trusted content, right? Because it's in the voice of your customer.
Well, I guess in that regard, kind of going back to the beginning in terms of, you're creating this content that is so authentic to your brand and your value. How are you measuring your success in the AI era? Like, are you all kind of benchmarking GEO? Is that something that you're thinking about? I know that's kind of like the next big thing in comms. And so would love to understand how you're starting to think about all of that. And Christian, you kind of hit on this earlier in terms of, just putting in like, tell me about my brand and my mission earlier, and seeing if it aligns with your true value prop. But I'd love if you could all talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely starting to benchmark it in terms of like how and where our brand is showing up in these AI generated outputs. And I think it's already been pretty eye-opening when you take a look at it. And I think, a few of the early takeaways, one is that earned media is playing an outsized role, right, in really influencing those AI outputs. And I think clear category definition significantly improves like your visibility in a world where ambiguity is like a real liability, right? And so, I think this is exactly why, we will continue to see PR and earned media budgets begin to increase. And I think it does point to this fundamental shift, right? It's like as AI begins to really replace traditional search engines and search behaviors, marketing spend's going to move away from, more of that sort of paid stuff towards more of the earned media stuff because the playbook is changing.
Yeah.
Like it's like earned isn't just about pure awareness anymore. It's becoming core to how people discover information about your company.
Yeah, we actually had another webinar a few weeks ago with our partner at Evertune, which is a GEO benchmarking platform. And you're 100% right. Earned media, music to my ears, accounts for over 30% of responses that are derived from AI. So 100% agree with you that, earned media is still incredibly important today.
Yeah. Yeah, we're at the early stages of tracking that as well. And we're seeing, showing up in our referral source, top 5 in our every month from the website, for example. But we're definitely at early stages.
Yeah,
we're definitely shaping our content. We're putting FAQs on all of our product pages. Like we're really trying to do all the fundamentals right now. But it's going fast.
I would agree. I would definitely agree that we're GEO curious, I guess you call us. We're definitely at that like early stage. We know it's an emerging priority, but we're sort of like learning it. Probably a lot of us learned SEO when that's first emerged. It's like you do little experiments to try to figure out if it does the thing that it says it's going to do, and then you start to like widen those experiments, and like ironically, you take it from pilot to deployment, pilot to production. What I think is interesting is I've been thinking a lot about this. So I had a conversation earlier this week with one of my teammates who's in Japan, and she was talking about how for them, owned media makes up a huge percentage of the work that they do, because they know that for reporters, the behavior there is they will go to an owned site before they'll go to a paid site or even go to a fellow earned site. Some of that is because they still trust the company to be sort of like the arbiter of authenticity when it comes to how they talk about themselves. But some of it also is it's easier to find if you SEO optimize it correctly.
Yeah.
What it was eye-opening for me, because candidly, I don't think a lot about owned when I think about my media strategy. And it's not because I don't think it's important. It's just because I know that here in the US, owned media is not seen as being maybe as authentic or as much of a sort of like center of truth maybe as it is in other markets. But what that told me is like, perhaps it should be. Perhaps we should be like, changing the dials a little bit in our mix so that owned media has become more of our strategy, but also changing the way in which we approach owned media.
Yeah.
Owned could be and should be, like in my view, the place where you can add more subjectivity to your storytelling. Not necessarily subjectivity that ends in rah rah, insert name of brand. It's more subjectivity of like your ability to tell the story that you want to tell without the interference of having to follow like the objective narrative rules of like of the earned world. You know, I definitely think a lot about that, and I also to the point that's being made, like that influences the GEO strategy too. You know,
Totally.
are you putting the anchors in the right place in all of the other content channels besides earned to make sure that you are like, you know, conditioning the models to find you the way that you want to be found?
Well, and owned media too, I think gives you the most control.
Yes.
You can't necessarily control what comes out of a interview with the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, but you can have 100%
Oh
control
yeah.
over
Yeah.
any owned content that you have. And then, ideally use it to inspire and fuel earned campaigns as well. So
Yeah.
it all kind of comes back from that central hub. Um, it definitely goes back to, again, like making sure that your message sticks.
Yeah.
Um, so I want to talk a little bit about like where we see this all going. I know a couple of weeks ago we saw that OpenAI acquired TBPN, which is a leading tech podcast. Um, and for me, I know it really kind of opened my eyes like, wow, this AI thing is here to stay and it's moving quickly and it's has a direct impact on media. So curious if you had a similar reaction and if you see that more AI engines will acquire and own or maybe even create their own media properties. And what does that mean for all of us?
Yeah, I mean, these days I think if AI companies are controlling how information is surfaced, owning the content creation engine is really like a natural next step. And so, I do think that we'll see more of this where AI platforms are, becoming both the distributors and the creators of the content. And I
Yeah.
think that makes our job that much more important and more critical to not just the marketing engine, but to the company engine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think from an ad subsidized AI infrastructure, so I can see that becoming another thing we have to think
Yes.
about, right?
Yes.
Kind of keeping that church and state, if you will. Like,
Yeah.
so I kind of worry about just like sponsor content versus just organic. It's so it will be interesting. Another thing we have to think about. I almost like the fact that there isn't any advertising for AI searches, but I can only
Yep.
imagine that model and the complexity, as we all know, of just learning the SEO science, right? Which
Yeah.
ever changing.
I
Yeah.
mean, I sort of come at it, I think, from I definitely agree with both those points, but I come at it from like maybe a little bit of like a different media sort of like thought processes. Um, over the last, I'd say like 12, 18 months or so, you've seen this enormous amount of consolidation that's happening with podcasts,
Mm-hmm.
where we have, one or two like big podcast publishers, whether it's like iHeart or someone like that, it just goes on a buying spree. And really what they're doing is they're buying audiences. Yes, they're buying content because they're buying shows and the respective hosts, whatever. What they're really doing is they're buying audiences because they know that it's too long of a tail and too expensive and not enough of a time, not a short enough of a time horizon from a competitive standpoint for them to try to build those audiences on their own. So they just
Mm,
open the checkbook and buy somebody.
yep.
I can see that this could turn into the same kind of thing when it comes to big tech companies buying existing media channels for the audience that they know that they're going to get when they do that. So that they can just speak more directly to whomever that is, whether it's a builder audience, whether it's executive audience, whether it's, whoever's behind door number three. Like that is
Mhm.
definitely something that one of the first things I thought of when I read that news was, oh, they're just buying like content. They're buying a title. They're buying an audience.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I have a couple final kind of what is the word? Final questions. I'm blanking on the word. But as before I get into those, for those tuning in, if you all have any questions, definitely feel free to put questions into the chat, and we can open it up to Q&A. But meantime, I think two quick questions I have. One is, are there current comms best practices that you think, have sworn by for for many years and you think will ultimately become obsolete very soon?
I think overly polished stuff that is very substance light is gone are those days. I also think just one-off campaigns that aren't evergreen or always on without clear and direct follow through, I think is going to be a problem. And then finally, volume. Right? Like it's not just a volume game anymore. It's really a quality game. And that's what, matters most.
Yeah.
I agree with all of those points. I think it's, definitely quality for sure. And I think the things like campaigns, like annual campaigns, things that we used to do to try to drive brand are going to go away for sure. It's going to even confuse things even more. So
yeah. I mean, it makes a guy who's got a little bit of like a retro sensibility. It makes me happy that like we're kind of getting back to like first principles in a lot of ways, where story matters, authenticity matters, consistency matters, but also to sort of echo Toni and Kristina's point, like you can stop chasing flash. You can stop chasing like the single firework that goes off. You can actually start to like, get back to like, the first principle of like building momentum over time in an authentic way. But the other thing I think it does too, quite honestly, like that I'm personally really excited about is like for companies that are especially AI companies, but I think any technology company who's trying to tell a technology-led story, like the medium that you're delivering it to and the story that you want to tell, I don't think there's ever been a time when they've been so closely linked together. The platform that is being used to find you, if you're thinking about AI, is the same platform that you are using probably to create the story, whether it's from a creative standpoint, whether it's from using an LLM to write, to take a first pass at content standpoint. Like there's never been a time, at least in my memory, when like the medium and the tools have been so closely linked together. So like I think that's an advantage. Like I'm not sure exactly how to like properly articulate it, but like I think it's an advantage to know that like the same tools you're building with are the same tools in which they will be the thing that you're building will be found.
Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting to think about it that way. It's kind of like meta, but it's true. We have a couple of questions from the audience, so I'm going to take some time to go through those. The first question is, how will your teams approach paid ads when they become available in the AI platforms? It may be too early to say at this stage, but curious if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, I guess mine would be, again, the balance between the clarity in which we're delivering our message balanced with our voice of the customer. For me, that's where I would go, right? Is that kind of push and pull of being authentic and giving a different kind of slice to that. So it's not something I'm looking forward to figuring out anytime soon. It's coming quick. And I know that for sure. It's going to be $1 billion market. It's probably already is. So that's how I would look at it. I would try to find that balance of that human kind of connection.
Makes sense.
I think we all know it's coming though, because if streaming was free and now it has ad tiers, it's only a matter of time before the next great medium AI becomes, has ad level tiers and or ad free tiers depending.
Yeah, I totally agree.
People, it's everybody. It's crazy.
Second question from our audience. Do you think the industry is overestimating how much people actually trust AI generated responses?
No.
Quick answer. Love it.
There is a new program that just launched. I think it's ABC News on Hulu, but it's called Searched. And it takes a look every day at what people are searching for across LLMs and different search engines. No, I think people take it all as truth. I think we're back to the days of let me Google my symptoms and Lord, there's 18 different ways I'm going to, something bad will happen to me. So I think we're actually back to those days. And I do think people absolutely trust what the sort of AI generated outputs like, yes.
Maybe too much. Yeah.
Exactly. I
mean, if you want to know how much like how much assumed trust there is in some of these things. Just look at the places where they're saying where they're telling people not to trust AI or not to use AI for search. Schools, principally, my wife is a school teacher. My kids are both in one in eighth grade, one in high school. I have nephews who are in college, and they tell me continually that every professor, that every teacher they have says the same thing: is don't use AI for this. So that should
Mm,
tell you just how much trust there really is around these responses, or and how much fear there is of what that trust level might be,
mm,
both positively and negatively. So,
Yeah, on the reverse of that, not only just with content, but using agents internally, if you're using AI, you have to still make sure that this data is correct, right? Especially for
mm.
finance. Like, don't make your business decisions off it without proofing.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, that's another whole side of it as well. So trust
Yeah.
is an interesting term there. So
Yeah, I think that's very valid. Final question. If you were to advise a communications professional just starting at a new company today, they're building the comms function from the ground up, what is your piece of advice to that person?
I would tightly integrate comms with data and analytics from day one.
Mm,
And I think, understanding how your message is being surfaced, how it's being interpreted, I think it's now core to the function. And
yes,
so I think getting in early there, I think it would be, if I could do it all over again, that is what I would do.
such a good one.
Yeah.
yeah, I would meet people where they're at, right? That's where the persona you're going after. Really know your customers. But yeah, I agree with Toni on the data and metrics side of things as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. My piece of, after just saying that you shouldn't trust AI, my piece of advice would be, um, you should be like, AI should be your work partner. It shouldn't be your like this is going to be a torture analogy. Don't make it your boss, but make it your colleague.
Yeah.
So if you are
Mm,
initiating a project, the expectation is because of the way in which other parts of your organization are operating, they are probably using AI for their first stop. Why should we like you should be thinking as a communications person, you should be thinking like where can I where can like first of all like where can I use AI to make this better or improve this, but also like where can I use AI as an opportunity to like make this run better?
yeah.
Because like candidly, like there are a lot of things that AI is like it's made leaps and bounds in, but there are a lot of things maybe it still has like miles to go. But one of the things that's definitely been proven to be is it is an incredible automation partner.
Mhm.
So things like, look at every process that that takes you 3 or 4 hours or maybe 3 or 4 days to do in your day to day, and think about ways in which you can perhaps automate that for like huge efficiency gains. Like I'll give you two right off the bat. We have like, raise your hand if you're on this call and you have a somewhat torturous press release process.
Mine's
We created an automation that doesn't take you through all the way to the end, but takes you through like the first three steps of what are the key messages you need to have in here? Who is this audience for? What's the headline you're envisioning? How are you thinking about where this is relevant, who it's relevant for, what kind, what product this should be assigned to, or whatever. Like we create an automation where we ask the requester to answer that themselves. And then once they answer that, they get a message that tells them, okay, based on what you gave us, we have an SLA of 3 days or 5 days or 2 weeks or whatever from origination to completion. So from a first draft to approval. Like that's an automation that has personally saved my team probably 3 to 4 days on average just now with just that simple automation. Now extrapolate that into another thing I'm looking at using AI for, not just content generation, but the style guide thing I mentioned earlier. Think of how much time that maybe you might have spent reviewing word for word a piece of content to make sure that like they put the apostrophe in the right place for a possessive, or that they're using the right grammar, or that they have this new product name reflected properly, or they have like the right URL or whatever. If you can teach an LLM how to use your brand guide and your style guide, suddenly all you have to do is the prompt could be run our style guide on this. And now what used to take you like an afternoon can become something that's done in like 5 minutes. And then to your point, Kristina, then you apply the human in the loop portion to it, which is where you sit down and you actually go through it again and say, okay, these are the flags, like these are the risks versus the things that are okay, and then read the entire thing with that in mind. The last thing I'll say is how many times in your week do you get a request from a salesperson who says, can you tell me the last like 12 press releases we wrote and how they tell the story of X? And X could be our journey from one category to another, or it could be how we've like entered this new industry, or it could be how we've evolved this product set, whatever. I get probably one or two of these a week. Using my good friend Claude, I just put a prompt in Claude that said, review the last 12 months of our press releases, review the last 12 months of our awards, last 12 months of our executive quotes, last 12 months of our coverage in the following outlets, and tell me like what are the dominant narratives that come out of these things. It spits it back out. Knowing that I was a part of those programs, I can then go back and review that and then bounce that against my own personal knowledge. But then I can also say that's not right. I know that that source is wrong, whatever. So like now I've taken what was like a full day of research and turned it into like 45 minutes. That's a huge productivity gain. Those are the kinds of things where like if you are thinking of AI as your colleague and not as your boss, if you're thinking of AI as like a work partner who you could like work with, suddenly you can find yourself able to do like more high level work because you've taken all sort of like the manually intensive stuff out of your day to day.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, listen, I think there's so many questions around AI and where this is all going, but it is fundamentally incredibly helpful for all of us in communications, or probably anyone in business. And so I think learning to embrace it in smart ways that are going to make us more effective in our roles is critical. Like I think we have to embrace it. We can't hide from it. So thank you all so much for making the time to talk through all of this. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience learned a ton. So really appreciate all of your insights. And if anyone on the call has questions for these guys, feel free to reach out to us at B2. We're happy to put you in touch with Christian, Kristina, Toni. And we'll also be posting a recap of this webinar on our social channels and our website, so you can find it there as well. So thank you, everyone, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks,
you.
Kristen.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.